The European Economic and Social Committee has proposed a Blue Transition Fund as a single access point for European-level water investments. It should support resilient infrastructure and sustainable water management, research and uptake of water-efficient technologies. A Blue Transition Fund should also support the transition for the most vulnerable groups without leaving anyone behind. And as public funding alone to combat these challenges is not enough, we need private investment to bridge the financing gap.
First of all, by being proud of our water industry. We are best in class worldwide in water technologies and in innovation. Close to 40% of the patents that get filed every year come from the European continent. So pride of being where we are, but also conscious of the fact that unless we continue overcoming the fragmentation that we see, especially at the level of public supply, we will maybe not consolidate the EU made in EU know-how as we should. So the second attempt will be one of creating better solidarity, more private-public partnerships in order to overcome the challenges ahead, because let's face it, we have a huge investment gap also to modernize our infrastructure, and unless we unite the forces, we may not manage only with public money. So together, as usual, we can.
It's not an easy question. Certainly the investments and financing of water infrastructure, water management companies is a complex issue. Different countries in Europe have a different approach how to do it. In general, there could be a public source of financing or private source of financing. I strongly believe, and I think our discussion today showed that to have a sustainable form of financing for water management, water infrastructure in Europe requires public-private partnerships. So this is something that we have to create, and to allow private sector to enter into water management, water financing. Conditions have to be created. It means there has to be a clear, predictable regulation for this area. It means that these projects have to be so-called bankable, and this also means at the end of the day that the national regulators who are creating regulations for the water management, they need to allow these companies to have sufficient cash flow and sufficient investment or money for the investment.
I already told on the meeting, so we have really high debt on the investments, especially in the renewal. It's more than 5 billion euros. So when we calculate it for one inhabitant in Slovakia, one capital, so it's 1,000 euro per capital. So now the regulatory policy doesn't cover the operational cost. So it's not possible to get these investments only from the regulatory resources. So we need some new investments from not from only our people, but also from the private sector to get inside to the water sector.
Yeah, I did mention green bond financing as something that the European Investment Bank, for example, has been doing very actively to raise money for supporting water projects. I also mentioned some interesting maybe correlation, or example in Slovakia, where, as we know, there was a state bond issuance and sale to the citizens of Slovakia. And very quickly, almost 1 billion euro was raised, and people bought these bonds very quickly. So I think that there is a lot of potential to use the money which is in the savings of citizens, which are in the hands of different funds, insurance companies, pension funds, etc., to be able to fill this gap, because we know that the investment gap in Slovakia in the water infrastructure is over 5 billion euros. So it's a lot of money, but de facto there is money which could be used to fill this gap. I think there are several, but the main one is the predictability of the regulation. if the private companies don't see that there is, because the investments into water infrastructure are very long-term, minimum 10, 15, maybe 20 years, these private water companies have to make sure that if they invest into some project in water management, that in the next elections, the regulations will not change. So this predictability, long-term predictability, and regulation which would support investments are critical and the main ones.
At first, we need the stable and the predictable regulatory policy. That is the main thing what we need. Without that, we can't do the water resilient strategy. That's true. Of course, we need also the investments in the water sector. For example, we have several examples of the good practices in the countries, European countries, how when the investment comes from the private sector to the public water sector, for example, there are the bonds. We know, for example, in Sweden they use the green bonds. Also in Italy they use the blue bonds. And in Italy they improve the infrastructure of the water supply system on really high level.